So you've just stumbled into Warhammer 40,000. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. You are a new hobbyist, and while fiddling through the pages of such a great tome, you have encountered the stories that have inspired many a hobbyist before you to get started in the hobby. Little did you know that a couple of pictures inside the book would inspire you to play with a faction known as the Drukhari. So stay tuned as I go over how to start collecting Drukhari in Warhammer 40,000. Let's begin.
The Dark Kid.
So you want to become an Archon, Succubus, or Homunculus and collect the Drukhari, do you? Well, let me, Archon Skari, the Blade, guide you through this process of assembling your Cabal, Cult, or Coven. The first thing you're going to need is one of the most recent codexes. This is not the codex. That is not the codex. That looks like the codex, but it's not the codex. Neither is this. Haha! We come to the most current edition of the codex for 8th edition, Warhammer 40,000. In it, you will find all the rules that you will need to play, collect, model, and take apart your enemies' armies and forces. So, where to spend your money, what units do you prefer, and how to play will be as varied as each Archon themselves. But there are a couple of tips and tricks that I will share with you, the aspiring budding Archon, Succubus, or Homunculus, in order for you to squeeze the juices of life from your enemies. This video will explore how to dive into the Drukhari as a hobby. There are three main sort of factions that you have to keep in mind. As the Drukhari book has the Coven, led by the Homunculus. You have the Cabal, led by the Archons, like Archon Skari here. And the Witch Cults, led by a Succubus, as you can see here. Now, each of these factions has a variety of different rules and access to a variety of different units that will receive the benefits of their obsessions and their special rules. Anything from the elusive Beastmaster and their beasts, all the way to Hellions, Reaver jet bikes, or witches in the case of the Witch Cults. The Cabal has access to Kabalite warriors, basic foot infantry and troops, a Court of the Archon-style bodyguards for Archons themselves, and the Ravagers, which provide a lot of the heavy firepower in the Cabal. And then the Covens with their heavy grotesques, the Racks, which are one of the toughest troops, Kronos, and even Talos as well, that can come in groups. Now, with these three different factions, they're essentially one mega faction. It's very cool to use all of your detachment choices on different Drukhari obsessions, so you can mix and match and get the best out of it. There are units that can be used between the different, essentially, factions and obsessions. Void Raven Bomber and Razorwing Jet Fighters, for example, can be both Cabal and Witch Cult. Things like Raiders, that's a converted Raider there, thank you, Kyle. Raiders and Venoms can be used in all three. So we have Coven, Cabal, and Cult. Forge World also gives you some really cool options with the Tantalus, which is by far my favorite Drukhari unit. It is amazing looking. I love it. It's one of my favorite miniatures. And the Reaper. I don't have mine built or painted, but another cool Ravager-style tank that can be taken by all three different styles of Drukhari army. And last but not least, you can supplement your collection with units that can be added to any Drukhari force. Mandrakes, shadowy Mandrakes. Scourge, that can be equipped with lots of different types of heavy weapons. And the Incubi, close combat unit that will kill things. And then we have, of course, the special characters. Now, the special characters themselves, usually go with a specific faction in of themselves, like Lilith Hesperex has to be used with the witch cult of Strife. And then you have Urian Rakarth, who is a prophet of flesh. And then you have Drazar. Now, he can be included in all of the different Drukhari units. And there, with that sort of ability to really collect anything you want, the Drukhari have a special place in a collector's reservoir of just hobby in general. You can really do anything you want. So, I'm not going to be able to cover all the options in this video. What I will do is I will essentially explain how I would do a basic Cabal force, a basic Witch force, a basic Homunculus force, and then how I would combine all three to make a really cool thematic Drukhari army. Now we're going to take a look at the Homunculus Covens. Grotesques, Rax, Talos, Kronos, those are some of the units that you will be able to call upon in order to make a tough, heavy-hitting Coven list. Now, just Coven, and not really a very popular list in terms of just Coven. However, they complement other units and other parts of the Drukhari bulk extensively. However, if you did want to run a Coven list, I'll go over a 500-point list, a 1,000-point list, a 1,500-point list, and a 2,000-point list for the Coven. And here we have 500 points of Coven. So it is a battalion detachment. I've decided to basically make it from a battalion just because it's the simplest way to sort of form an army. You have 2 HQ choices. We have one Homunculus and another Homunculus. One is just stock. The other one has an electrocorrosive whip, which will be a good close combat weapon in case he has to get stuck in. We have some troops, 1 6-man unit, and then 2 5-man units. And then we have 2 Talos with chain flails, and in this case I gave them haywire blasters in order to do some anti-tank capabilities. Now, the Talos can of course be in a unit of 2, if you so prefer, as well. So you can either have a unit of 2 or 2 separates, but that's about 500 points. Gives you a bit of a flexible list, some very hefty troop choices, and of course, good HQs. So that's not a very expensive way to start a Coven force, but how do you expand on this army to make it 1,000 points? 1,000 points of Coven becomes an expanded force. Now this is where you get to be a little bit more creative. Now I've decided to go for a bigger unit of Rax. I've given one an Ossifactor and one a Venom Blade to be a little bit more punchy. The Ossifactor also helps for Fire and Fade, which is a really cool stratagem that allows a foot unit to move a lot faster on the battlefield to get objectives and cover ground. I've added a 3rd Talos, so you can either do 3 units or of 1, or you can have 1 big unit. I like the big units, they're harder to kill. And then I've done the liberty of adding a Raider to add some transportation options for either the 2 rack units or both characters in 1 rack unit to lower the amount of drops. And then last but not least, a large unit of 8 Grotesques. Now, as a Coven player, you will be using a lot of Grotesques and I would say Talos. Rax, one of the best, toughest troops, 4+ invulnerable save, good toughness around Homunculus. And the Grotesques, one of the questions I get the most is how do you convert Grotesques, or what do you use for your Grotesques? You can go for the Games Workshop Grotesque model. They are quite expensive, but I highly recommend you convert them. I have a few of the actual Grotesque miniatures, which are resin miniatures. They look fantastic as well. But I also have converted ogres from the Warhammer Fantasy Age of Sigmar range with a little bit of green stuff and some creativity. You can really kind of make a variety of different things. And then I also have one of my favorites is the Bullgrin. Bullgrin with a bit of green stuff and some vials and Talos bits. You know, really kind of makes their own sort of menacing Grotesques. I've also seen Crypt Ghouls and Skaven, Mega Rats being used, but you can get really creative and you will be using these quite extensively. as you build a Coven force. So that is 1,000 points, and it is a good core to any Coven list. We have expanded our force to 1,500 points, and what we've done is I've added more Talos and a Kronos to have a spearhead detachment. I've also added a special character in the form of Urien Rakoth. So that gives us some more command points and a really cool heavy hitting part of the list that helps buff the rest of the army and provides good anti-tank and anti-horde capabilities. I've also made that rack unit 9 men strong, so now we can have 9 men and a Homunculus in a raider. The rest of the army has stayed essentially the same for 1,500 points. So for the last 500 points, what shall we do? I think we should add some mercenaries. Now you can either add some more racks and make 3 units of 10 racks, maybe drop the raider and put in some more Talos, or maybe even make the Kronos unit bigger, or maybe add a little bit there. But essentially you see sort of the style of list that you're going to do. And the last 500 points of a 2,000 point list is really up to you. Once you get the collection up and running, it's really about what you enjoy painting and playing and what your local meta looks like. So if you like this Coven list for 1,500 points, let me know down below in the comments if it's something that you would run yourself. How close was it to what you had cooking up in your kitchen? So fellow Homunculus, get to the pain table. Now let's dive into the witch cults. The witch cult, gladiators of the arenas, led by the succubi, succubus, witch cult leaders. You also have the witches, you've got Reaver jet bikes, Hellions, beast packs, Razorwing jet fighters, and a variety of other units at your disposal. But how to make an army that uses their abilities to the max? The witch cult, definitely more aggressive than the Coven in terms of speed, maneuverability, but also it's not as resilient. So, for 500 points, what have I decided to put in my little 500 point witch cult list? Basing it off, of course, a battalion. This is a standard layout. We have 2 succubus. One has an archite glaive and a pistol. One has a shardnet and impaler as well, because succubuses can take witch weapons, which makes them very versatile HQs. Now I've taken the 3 witch units. I've taken 2 5-man witch units with Hydra gauntlets that gives them reroll wounds in combat, in 2 venoms with double cannons. Makes them be able to move around, get objectives, and strike fast and hard. We also have a raider with a disintegrator cannon and a 8-man witch unit with a shardnet and impaler and an agonizer. Now, of course, that 8-man unit and these 2 witches can go in there. That gives you a very elite force. It's harder to play with the witch cult in the current meta. However, using them well, they can be great shock troops. Now, from here, how would I increase it to 1,000 points? Let's take a look. I have expanded the witch cult up to 1,000 points. So, what have we done? I still have my 3 troops. It's still a battalion detachment. I've added a Razorwing jet fighter and 10 Razorwing flocks with a Beastmaster. Now these Razorwing flocks I got from Zombicide. They're the Murder of Crows set. You can buy 1 box and it makes you like 16 Razorwing flocks. It's a great buy. And last but not least, I've added 9 Reaver jet bikes. Now these Reaver jet bikes are armed with 3 heat lances, and of course I have the Sergeant there as well. So all in all, I've expanded the list to 1,000 points, adding some additional firepower and some screening potential in order to get some board control. So from here, let's expand this army to 1,500 points. We've expanded the army to 1,500 points. I brought along another HQ in the form of Lilith Hesperax, who's one of the best HQs in the game. And what I've done is added 2 Scourge. Now they, of course, can be added to any Drukhari army and in a fast attack. So I've especially condensed the Bikers and the 2 Scourge into a Outrider detachment with Lilith Hesperax. I dropped 5 of the little birds and gonna use them more instead of screening as a backfield sort of zone of control. And I've added a Void Raven bomber and a second Razor Wing jet fighter to make it a flyer wing. So with the flyer wing and the additional units, we've expanded it to 1,500 points. You can always drop the Raider and make that unit a large 20-man unit, and then you can play around with the obsessions, right? So I have done some work with the obsessions before, and some videos specifically on stratagems and obsessions. You can link up to the Patreon. That was a video that I released there. Okay, what do you think of the witch cults? What would you do to add it to 2,000 points? In my opinion, I'd probably add some more Reaver jet bikes, and I'd probably flesh out the witch units, as witches are quite good when it comes to combat. So this style of army is very hard-hitting, very aggressive, and not as resilient as the Coven. Now let's take a look at the Kabals and how to build a Kabalite raiding force. So let's begin with the Kabal force. Forces of the Kabal led by an Archon, Kabalite warriors, Ravagers, Razor Wing jet fighters, Void Raven bombers. So how would you begin? Well, let's take a look at the different units available and what I would recommend for you to build a 500 point list, a 1,000 point list, a 1,500 point list, and a 2,000 point list of Kabalite units. Now, of course, for more options on obsessions, tactics, that sort of thing, I did do a whole series for the Patreons. You can check the link for that in the description down below. We start our foray into the Kabal with 500 points of Kabalite warriors. This can be any obsession that you really like, and it sort of showcases the strengths of the Kabal. The Kabal is probably the most iconic form of collecting the Drukhari. So, as the last two options for the Coven and the Witch Cult, we have started with a basic battalion at 500 points. Starting with 2 HQs, a couple of Archons. Now, lore-wise, the Archons would be an Archon and a Drakon. In this case, you can pick whichever one you'd like. I have an Archon with an Agonizer here, and an Archon with a Venom Blade. You could pick whichever one to be the Warlord, etc. They provide some good access to relics. They provide rerolls for the rest of the Kabal, like rerolls to hit. And they also have access to some cool Warlord traits, which is pretty neat. Then the Kabalite Warrior, which is probably one of the cheapest and best troop options, not only in the Codex, but in the entire game of Warhammer 40,000. They provide a cheap option of objective secured troops that allow you to take objectives against other non-troop units. In this case, we have a Cyberite in every single unit, which is a squad sergeant, and in this unit we have a blaster. Here we have another 5-man unit with no blaster, and then here we have another 5-man unit with a secondary blaster. So we have 2 units with blasters, 1 without. To carry them, the Kabal loves speed. So in this case, we've gone for 2 Venoms, each with double splinter cannons. Now, the Venoms provide transportation for the blaster units, getting that anti-tank weaponry into range and providing a hail of splinter fire as secondary support. We also have the Raider with a disintegrator cannon that happens to be one of the base troop transports in the game. It's the cheapest way to run it with the disintegrator cannon, and with that you can have the 5-man unit and both Archons riding inside of it, protected from enemy fire, and also reducing the drop count to 3 drops instead of a lot of drops. So from this sort of base list, where would we take the Kabalite unit? I feel like we need to add some heavy firepower. And here I've expanded the Kabal force to 1,000 points. We've added quite a bit of heavy firepower and some cool little flavor in the form of some mandrakes. So what have we done? The Archons have stayed the same. We've added a few models to this unit, including a blaster, so they can embark in the transport with 8 men and then have space for both of the Archons in there. We have 5 mandrakes. They have an innate ability to deep strike. Come out of the shadows, essentially, 9 inches away from the enemy, giving you some
manipulation throughout the game, and they do mortal wounds and are pretty decent in close combat. And then to round it off, we've added 2 Ravagers with triple disintegrator cannons, iconic vehicles that spell death and destruction for your enemies. They're quite fragile against anti-tank firepower, however, they put out a lot of damage. And combined with the rerolls that you can give them with the Archons and some other cool special rules like Ignore Cover from Flayed Skull, for example, they can spell the doom of enemy forces at range. And a Razorwing Jet Fighter with disintegrator cannons as well, and a twin splinter rifle. This gives you access to go out and touch someone far away across the deployment zone. And now, as you can see, our Kabalite force is starting to take shape. The last 500 points will essentially seal the vision that we have for the Cabal. With an extra 500 points, we expand our Kabalite force to 1,500 points. This is essentially going to give you more of a feel of the different elements that you can add to a Cabal while still adding a lot of firepower. This army is, no joke, a very strong army at 1,500 points. It has a lot of the elements that you'll need to not only play pickup games, but also even some competition games if you want to go the route of the Cabal. So, how have we expanded this part of the force? Well, we've added 5 more Mandrakes and made it a 10-man Mandrake unit. We've added an entire unit of Scourge. That is 10 Scourge with 4 Shredders. However, you can use Haywire Blasters if you feel you're light on anti-tank. I prefer the Shredders because they're great at clearing screens and they reroll wounds, which is fantastic. We've added a 3rd Venom and another unit of 5 Kabalite Warriors with another Blaster. And we've added 1 more Ravager, filling out our heavy support slots with 3 Ravagers and a Razorwing, adding a lot of firepower to this army. We've dropped 1 Kabalite Warrior from this, going from 8 to 7, and that has allowed us to add in a Slith that can, with the Archons, still travel in the Raider. This provides the Archons with some needed support against sniper fire, as well as the ubiquitous missile that can be shot from a Castellan to kill your Warlord. It's always good to maybe consider his 27 points and add him into the list. And with this, we have a 1,500 point list. Now, the 500 points extra to 2,000 points can be really added with whatever. If you go back and take a look at the different armies that I have showcased, you can easily mix and match and do 3 500 point lists between all 3 of the different factions, do 1,000 points and another 1,000 points, do 2 500 points and 1,000 points, and essentially make an army that suits your preference, your playstyle, and that you will find rewarding to not only collect, but play with on the battlefield. And that concludes our video on how to collect Drukhari. They are a lot of different options. Now, by design, I didn't showcase many of the index options that you can add in, like Trueborn and the Phantasm Grenade Launcher on the Archon and the Blaster on the Archon, things that might be going the way of the dodo at some point, which means that I don't want you to get used to them or convert them. I stuck pretty much to the codex to help you, the new Drukhari, Archon, Homunculus, or Succubus. Now, let me know what you think down below. This video has been a lot of fun to do, and it was made possible thanks to the patronage of an anonymous donor who wanted me to make this video. So thank you so much, and I hope that you can also gain insight on how to collect the army of the Drukhari. Well, I'm Skari, your grateful host, signing off until the next video, and I hope you've been enjoying the content. Leave me a comment down below. As always, I have to thank the Patreon family, the denizens of the Dark City, without whom I would not be able to make the content that you see in front of you today. If you'd like to join the growing denizen community, check the link down below for some exclusive content. Thanks a lot, guys, and I'm Skari, signing off until next time. Skari out.